Well, if you've been in the distance running scene for even a short amount of time, there's a very good chance you've heard of the athlete they call Pre. Steve Prefontaine, at the time of his death, was the record holder in the United States for the men's events from the 2,000 meters on the track all the way through to the 10,000 meters. But there's been a lot of athletes throughout history who've achieved some pretty incredible feats, and we're not talking about them 40, 50 years after their death. So what is it about Pre that makes him stick in our minds and still talk about him all these years later? I think there's a lot of factors. Today, I wanted to have a look at 3 factors of the Steve Prefontaine story that I think plays a really big impact on how much we talk about him all these years later. Let's have a look. Well, it wasn't just his good looks, his charisma, and that big dirty mustache that he rocked at athletics meets around the United States and all around the world for that matter that made us talk about him. I think his racing style is one of the most impressive, inspirational parts of the Prefontaine story. Everybody who knows Pre, everybody who knew Pre, understood that he had no interest in running a tactical race. He didn't want to know who was the fastest in the last 100 meters of a race. He wanted to know who had the balls to be able to run at a pace which was terrifying to most, even elite distance runners. He was well known for a number of his quotes around this subject. To give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And perhaps an even more terrifying one: the only good pace is suicide pace, and today seems like a pretty good time to die. You knew going into the race that you're going to have to absolutely bust your balls to be able to manage to race the pace that Pre liked to run. In a famous movie, Without Limits, the line from Prefontaine going into the 5,000 meter final at the Munich Olympics, he says, "You might be able to beat me, but you're going to have to bleed to do it." I mean, there's something about these comments that makes distance running cool. You don't really get the reputation in the world of distance running as being someone super cool. But Prefontaine, with his ambitious and brave approach to running races in the style that he appreciated, you couldn't help but admire it. You couldn't help but respect it. You couldn't help but think it had a little bit of cool about it. Prefontaine had the unique ability to test his personal limits, to test the limits of those around him, and to call it out before he happened. Prefontaine was happy for you to know the way that he was going to race, because all you had to do was match him. That was one of the big reasons that I think Prefontaine still has our heart stay. It taps into some innate desire we have to get the best out of ourselves. Not always the smartest approach to racing, but certainly the most interesting. When we dig into the Prefontaine story a little bit more, you learn some about his training that you think, all right, in 2022, it might not be the smartest approach to training. He certainly had an approach which isn't recommended by so many professionals about the work effort that you've got to put in. We like to balance it a little bit with, okay, work hard, recover, work hard, recover. Prefontaine had far more of a, hey, just work hard approach to training. We see this in the documentaries Fire on the Track. We read about this in his book, but we also hear about this from his teammates at the time. He caused up a stir when at so many of these track meets, he started pushing paces faster than what was required. Prefontaine, I think, in the average human body would have had the ability to break it down really quickly, which leads to injury, which leads to fatigue, which leads to plateaus in performance. But he had this unique strength, this unique capacity to be able to just layer these training sessions one upon another for far longer than so many of the other athletes. And while it's a really respected thing in Prefontaine, definitely not something that we encourage young athletes who are just getting into the sport to try and lay down, because there's been so many examples of people who have tried to take the Prefontaine approach whose bodies just can't match it. So if you're a young athlete out there thinking, all right, if Pre did it like that, that's the way I'm going to do it. There's also other approaches that world-class athletes are taking which are completely different to this. But I think from that pure romantic side of distance running, the idea that you can just go out and smash yourself day in, day out and not break down and in fact just keep getting faster and faster, I think that's a pretty big thing in the Prefontaine conversation that so many of us really love. I think the last thing about Prefontaine that you just can't look past was the charisma that he brought to the track. I mentioned earlier, he had this unique ability to make distance running cool. Now, as cool as we know we are, we don't really have the reputation on a world scale of being a super cool sport. I mean, you look at a sport like UFC, you've got your Conor McGregors of the world, who even if you don't like the sport, you can't help but watch because you can't believe the things that he's saying, the things he's standing up for. You go back even further in the boxing world, you look at someone like Muhammad Ali, you go, all right, this is bigger than just the sport that we're watching. This is about what this person's doing. They're shaping culture in some strange kind of way. Prefontaine tapped into a little bit of that. He was well known for being pretty outspoken and pretty brazen with the athletic union there, which dictated the requirements to qualify for the Olympic Games. He caused a little bit of a controversy when he stated his opinion, which seemed to be in a complete opposite direction to what some of the athletic unions had to believe. I also think some of the quotes, some of the outlandish claims, some of the big comments, and just the confidence that he had to back up what he was claiming to do seemed to raise people's attention, seemed to turn heads towards not only him, but the sport of distance running. The truth is, the conversation around Pre, it has gone on for nearly half a century now, and there's so many things that different people love about him. And I've only ticked off 3 that I like. What do you think it was that made Prefontaine such a hot figure? Obviously his talent, obviously his charisma, obviously his race tactics, but there's so much more. You got an opinion? Let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear it. If you enjoyed this video, we've got plenty more.